Good evening. Welcome back to our Bible study. We've had a couple of weeks vacation from the life of Christ as our church has been celebrating the graduation of kindergarten and then 12th grade at Mid-State Christian Academy. But I'm back. I'm glad to be back doing the Bible study. Keep in mind that next week I'll be out of town. I'll be out of the country in Honduras. So there's not going to be a Bible study next Wednesday. There will be one when I get back the following week. So we'll have another week off. I'm sorry. The summer gets a little chaotic because that is usually the time of year where I travel most often with camps and other things. But let's go ahead and pick up in Matthew chapter 24. And we're going to be looking at verse 15. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand it, then let them which be in Judea flee unto the mountains. The next section of this chapter is dealing with the events following the abomination of desolation. Now, I've considered, after finishing this series on the life of Christ, going into a series on the book of Revelation. I did teach that a few years ago. It has been about 2 to 3 years ago. And I find that usually there's a rotation of people that come to the Bible studies, and those that are here now were not here when I taught it last. So it would probably be of some benefit to those in this room, and those that were here at the last time either have gone to different churches, moved out of the country, or out of the state at least. And so that is my thoughts. I'll let you know as we get closer if I continue going down that road. But this is basically dealing with a portion of what is in Revelation. So let's talk about the abomination of desolation. Let's talk about this prophecy that we're seeing here repeated from the book of Daniel. And before I do that, let me give you a brief overlook of what are the coming events after the rapture. I think I've done that recently. I believe I did that either a Bible study or Sunday morning. I don't remember which one, but in my mind, I remember doing this, but we'll do it again just so we can catch up to speed on what's happening tonight. The rapture is the next event on the, you might say, prophetic table. I've dealt with that recently, talking about the Holy Spirit and how the Holy Spirit, when he exits with the church, that is when Satan will kind of have free reign allowed by God to overtake the earth. The Antichrist will do his thing. About halfway through the 7-year period of tribulation, an event is going to take place that will rock the world. Now you say, well, Pastor Russ, won't there already be events that will rock the world? Yes, but they will be explained away, and for whatever reason, people will believe them. I personally believe that the rapture will be explained away by alien abduction. I know that may sound crazy in your ears, but not nearly as much if you begin paying attention to the news and all of the attention that is being given to UFOs and the military hiding supposedly this information about aliens and scientists looking for aliens. And now for the first time in my life, it is acceptable to believe in aliens. Not only acceptable, but it's almost becoming you are stupid if you don't believe in aliens. When I was a kid, you were stupid if you did believe in aliens. Scientists did not proclaim that. It was, you might say, the crazy people that walked around in alien outfits and says we're not alone, that kind of thing. And scientists would look at them and scoff at them. Now it's the academics that are saying we're not alone. I personally believe that is Satan preparing the world for the inevitable event of the rapture. And then when the rapture comes, it will just be, oh, it's aliens that took them. See, we were right all along. I don't believe that the world is going to be told the truth, it was God, and I don't believe Satan will be pointing to it was God. Now, there will come time in the tribulation period where God is going to make it very clear that he exists. There are going to be angels preaching around the world. His prophets will be speaking. So that will happen, and eventually. I don't believe it will happen initially. Now, those are only assumptions. I could be completely wrong, and I might be so far off that everyone knows it's God. Antichrist claims it's God and basically says we don't care anyways. That's a possibility. Regardless, after the rapture, we're going to find that there is a time of peace. In the Old Testament, the prophets tell us that the man of sin, Satan's servant, the Antichrist, is going to bring world peace. That does not mean that everyone gets along, because peace outside of God is often a result of wars. That to attain peace, there usually has to be some strong arming along the way to get peace. In fact, the Bible does tell us that Satan's servant, the Antichrist, is going to almost immediately, in the Old Testament, we're told this, immediately annihilate like a nation, a kingdom. We don't know which one. We don't know how that's going to look, but it seems like he's going to either wipe them off the face of the earth or subjugate them to servitude, but in some way he's going to establish his authority right after the rapture by using a nation as an example of, this is what happens if you don't follow me. The rest of the nations will then get in line. It seems more so out of fear than out of love or respect. So now they're in line, including the nation of Israel. Now, the nation of Israel seems to believe that their salvation has arrived. Not that they believe the Antichrist is the Messiah. They don't. But they believe that this world peace is finally offering them something they haven't had in thousands of years, and that is the elimination of people trying to kill them. That the Antichrist is basically saying, world peace, follow me, and we're all friends, and the Jews are going to say, great, we'll follow you, and our enemies will cease to be our enemies, because now we're all one big group of friends who follow the Antichrist. Also, during the tribulation period, we do know this, the temple is going to be rebuilt. It is possible that the temple will be rebuilt before the rapture. The Bible doesn't tell us when the temple will be rebuilt. We just know that it will be built by halfway through the tribulation. Why? Because the abomination of desolation takes place in the temple. There is no Jewish temple right now. So if you don't know your history or you don't know your present day Israel facts, the temple of Israel has been gone since the 1st century A.D. The Romans tore it down as Christ foretold that they would. We saw that last time we were together. It has not been rebuilt since. The Jews have not rebuilt it yet. Why not? Do you know why the Jews have not rebuilt the temple yet? What's keeping them from doing so? Joel? Yes, mosque. The temple grounds are currently on property owned and controlled by the Muslim faith, by Islam. And they're not about to let that go for the Jews. So it is possible that something will happen before the rapture where the Jews get control of that land by war or negotiation and start building the temple. It doesn't seem likely here at 2023, but so much can happen in 10 years, who knows, right? What also is a possibility is that when the Antichrist takes over, one of the first things he offers in world peace is this negotiation that establishes his authority in the Middle East at least and wins the Jews over. For the first few years, the Antichrist is the friend to the Jews. And I've often considered that one of the things that wins the Jews over, because they're not an easy people to win over, is giving them that land. In some way, he negotiates that. I don't know. It's purely an assumption. Whatever happens, whenever it happens, the Jews get control of that land at some point, start building a temple, and temple worship begins again, at least during the tribulation, if not before. Now, 3.5 years into the tribulation, the Jews are already using the temple. There's already worship practice going on. Priests are sacrificing again, like the Old Testament. They've reverted back to the Old Testament worship. And then in walks the Antichrist. Now, it's called the abomination of desolation because an abomination is something that is completely contrary to God. It is immoral. It is wicked. It is something against God's heart. And a desolation is a destruction of. Essentially, the Antichrist is going to walk into the temple and destroy the Old Testament worship service by taking part in the abomination of proclaiming himself to be God and to be worshipped as God in the temple. So I don't know if he's going to walk into the Holy of Holies. By the way, when they recreate the temple, they're not going to recreate it under God's instruction because there is no need for a temple. God tore the temple curtain, so God's not going to instruct them to do so. They'll do so outside of his instruction, but it will be built, which means the Holy of Holies, in my opinion, will not be the true Holy of Holies. I don't see the Holy of Holies having the power of God in it as it did in the Old Testament as instructed by God. I don't believe people will die if they walk into it because, again, it's not intended for God that this temple is rebuilt. He's just prophesying of what will happen when it's built, how it will be handled by the Antichrist. So he's going to walk in there, whether the Holy of Holies or not, I do not know. And he will establish himself as the object of worship by the Jews. And at that point, they will recognize we've made a mistake. That is why I don't think the Jews believe the Antichrist to be the Messiah. Because if they did, this wouldn't be a problem for them. If they believed the Antichrist is the Messiah, they'd be okay worshiping him as God. At least some of them who understand the Messiah and what the Messiah is would be okay with it. I think they're just happy for a leader that offers peace. But when this leader walks in and then says, I am God, you can no longer worship your God, you must worship me as God. That is the prophecy of Daniel. That is the prophecy of Christ. It is called the abomination of desolation, and it takes place during the tribulation period, halfway through 3.5 years. You say, Pastor Russ, how do you have the exact time? I'm not going to get into it tonight. If and when I go over Revelation again, I will give you all those details, but the prophecies lay out for us, and they give us the times, and they give us the months and the years, and 3.5 is laid out in Scripture in the Old Testament as the first part, 3.5 the last part, and we're told the abomination of desolation happens in the middle. From that point on, the Jews no longer have a friend in the world. All the nations are allowed to turn on the Jews, and in my opinion, it seems, are encouraged to turn on the Jews because the Antichrist himself turns on the Jews. His heart was never for God's people or God's nation. Obviously, his heart is Satan's heart, and Satan hates the Jews, as Satan hates all people who follow God, or all people or all nations in any way attached to God. He was just playing a game, biding his time for whatever reason Satan has. And then when he comes, his true self comes out, that is when the murders and the persecution happens for the Jews. And now, on top of all of the judgments that God is going to reign on the earth for 7 years, the trumpet judgments, the seal judgments, the vial judgments, not in that order, it's actually seal, trumpet, and then vial. All of those judgments on the world. On top of that, the Antichrist is going to rain terror down on the nation of Israel for the final 3.5 years. So with that in mind, let's read the warning Christ offers to the nation of Israel from that point, the abomination of desolation, on to the end. Here we go. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, verse 16, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Don't pack your bags. As soon as you see on the news, and by the way, I do believe at this point there is still access to world news. Why do I believe that? Because it is around this same time that the two prophets of God battle with the Antichrist and lose, are killed. And then for days, their carcasses are on the ground, left as the world celebrates their death. It's described as a celebration of gift giving. It's the world's version of Christmas, anti-Christmas. Let's give gifts, let's have a party, and let's be thankful that these two prophets are dead. Why? Because for the last 3 years or so, they've been forced to listen to these prophets because they could not be killed. Then, 3.5 years in, God removes his protection, and now they can be killed, and the world celebrates their death. You know the story. They end up being raised from the dead and ascending to heaven, and the world is in awe, and the whole world sees, we're told, their ascension, which implies to me some type of media, internet, or whatever. I don't believe that technology lasts much longer past that point. How can it with all the destruction that's going to happen and people dying and the world turning upside down? But at least up to that point, there seems to be access to technology. And so when you hear on the radio, watch on the news, listen on a broadcast, podcast, whatever it might be, whatever his name is, leader so-and-so has entered the temple and demands to be worshipped as God. And if you're a Jew, get out of town immediately. Don't pack your bags. Don't go around town and try to gather your friends. Why? Because the Antichrist is come knocking on your door right away? No, as I told you, the whole world will be against them. As soon as your neighbors, if you're a Jew, as soon as your neighbors recognize the protection of the Antichrist is off of you, they will kill you. It's possible that it'll be in that same news broadcast, the Antichrist has entered the temple, desires to be worshipped as God, and the Jews are now enemies of the state, and if you see any of them, arrest them and bring them to your local magistrate. That's a very possible scenario. So, flee to the mountains. Don't go home. Don't pack your bags. Verse 19, woe unto them that are with child, to them that give suck in those days, that have infants. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. Why in the winter? Well, it's no fun trying to find a new home in the middle of snowy weather, cold weather. Also pray it's not on a Sabbath. Why? Obviously, your preparation to flee would not be there. It doesn't mean that, oh, it's a Sabbath day, we can't travel. He's telling them to flee, whether it's Sabbath day or not. But they are less prepared to leave quickly on a Sabbath day. A practicing Jew wouldn't be doing anything on that day. For then shall be great tribulation, such as it was not since the beginning of the world to this time. No, nor ever shall be. Tribulation specifically for the Jews. He's not saying that the worst events in the world will happen right now. He's saying such will be tribulation upon the Jews who are encouraged to flee. And if they thought World War II was bad, they don't know anything. If they thought during the Middle Ages when the Catholic Church was seeking them out to kill them, they don't know anything. That is nothing compared to the mass murder that the Antichrist will enact over the next 3.5 years. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. If God did not return, all of the Jews would be killed. Now, it is possible that these verses are referring to the tribulation of the world. It is possible also that God is referring to the fact that unless he comes back, his tribulation upon the world, his judgments would kill them all. That's possible because that obviously would be true. The reason I believe this is talking about the tribulation of the Jews is because that's the context here. He's telling the Jews to flee into the mountains after the abomination of desolation because of the tribulation, I believe, that would be enacted on them. It doesn't mean it's not also true that if God kept judging the world and Christ didn't come back, the whole world would die. That's an obvious statement. I personally don't believe that's the warning here, though, even though that is also true. I believe he's warning the Jews and saying, if the Messiah doesn't return, his second coming, if I don't come back, not one Jew would survive. Surviving in the mountains for 3.5 years will kill many of them. They're not set up for that kind of thing. He says, woe unto those who have infants, your babies will die. The mothers will die. Parents, children will die. Only the strongest among you will be able to survive in the mountains. When you can't go into the city and get food, the moment you walk in the city, you're arrested and killed. So any food you get as a Jew would be food you're gathering. And for large communities of Jews living in the mountains, they're easy to find, which means you have to break up into small groups. And small groups of Jews, foraging is less likely to bring success when in a small group, you're not guaranteed to have people who know what they're doing. Again, big groups means death. Small groups mean death. So you're going to die unless Christ returns soon, which we know is 3.5 years. Verse 23, then if any man shall say unto you, lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. Now, you recognize that verse? That verse is often used in reference to the church, except that's not the context here. We're not talking about the church saying there's Christ and there's Christ. We're talking about the Jews during the worst time of their history, that final 3.5 years of the tribulation, where people will say, oh, there's the Messiah, there's the Messiah. Verse 24, there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. A couple things I want to say there. The Jews will be in a time of utter desperation. People they love will be killed in mass. There's no one to escape to. At least in World War II, you could escape to some homes, and they would try to get you into a country that kept you safe if they allowed you to. I would love to say that America was the hero of World War II. The United States turned away a lot of Jews, and we had a limit on how many we'd take, and unfortunately, a lot of them were killed because the United States wouldn't take them through immigration, and that is to our shame. So they went to other countries that tried, but there were some Jews that couldn't go anywhere and were caught and killed. At least they had the hope of possibility of other countries opening up to them. During this time, no one will want them. And the only reason they will take them is to kill them. So for a Jew to survive is on their own at this point, not under the safety of any country. So they'll be looking desperately for hope, desperately for the Messiah. And some will arise saying, I am he. Normally, you might think critically and say, well, are you really the Messiah, though? But in a time where everyone's dying and being killed and murdered, captured, never seen again, tortured, you'll grasp at anything, even the crazy people. And there will be a lot of crazy people during this time, during the tribulation time, saying, I'm the Messiah. No, I'm the Messiah. No, I'm the Messiah. And Christ is warning them, do not believe them. Now, the book of Revelation gives us enough information that we know when the Messiah comes, it will be very obvious. He's going to come from the clouds on a white horse, followed by an army of believers on white horses. There will be no doubt in anyone's mind when the Messiah arrives. These guys will be people who were born on earth, lived amongst their friends, and then all of a sudden claim, you know what, I've been the Messiah all this time and I never told you. They will do wonders and miracles. This will be, during the tribulation period, a time of supernatural phenomenon. Angels and demons both will be viewed by man. Not occasionally. It will be a common thing to see demons. A common thing to see angels. It will be so common, it will probably lose its amazement. Angels preaching from the heavens, demons in the form of beasts stinging and killing people, large armies. We find them coming from the ground. We're told out of hell, coming from the ground and attacking people. So the supernatural world will be opened up. The veil will be torn from the eyes of humanity. So the supernatural will almost become just commonplace. And the ability to do miracles will almost become commonplace. So these people will be able to do miracles, but obviously their miracles won't be from God. They'll be from Satan. Why? What are they trying to do? They're trying to trick the Jews. For what reason? I don't know. Maybe they're trying to trick the Jews saying, I'm the Messiah, come here, and then they turn them over to the Antichrist. We're not told what their end game is. Maybe they're so crazy they actually do believe they're Messiah. That's a possibility. Christ warns them, don't believe it just because you see it. He says, they'll be so convincing that if it were possible, they would deceive the elect. Now, who's the elect? Well, in this text again, who are we talking about? The Jews. Now, the Old Testament tells us that by the end of the tribulation period, all the Jews who are still alive will be saved. That's a promise from God. It does not mean all the Jews at the beginning of the tribulation will be saved. It doesn't mean all the Jews at the abomination of desolation will be saved. He states in the Old Testament, we'll look at this again when we go to Revelation, that when Christ returns, all remaining Jews will be saved. He will not kill any of them. So I believe, again, the word elect here isn't referring to just anyone, Gentile or otherwise. I believe he's talking about the Jews, and he's saying that those Jews who I'm going to save, that if it was possible, they also would be deceived. Now, maybe he is talking about the elect as it refers to Gentile believers. I do not believe that word elect in any way supports the view that God elects us out of our will against our choice. I believe that that word elect is referring to those who are saved. You might say saints, believers, and the word elect is interchangeable with saints. So if it were possible, these deceivers would even deceive the saints. Now, again, I think that word is referring to the saints of the nation of Israel, but I could be wrong, and it could be saints in general. Behold, I have told you before. Wherefore, if they shall say unto you, behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in secret chambers, believe it not. For as the lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth even at the west, so also shall the coming of the Son of Man come. So he doesn't give a whole lot of details here as far as Christ coming back on a white horse. But he is saying it's going to be such an amazing event, you won't be able to miss it. He's going to come out as lightning out of the east, shining from the west, even the west. That his light will be so bright, you'll be able to see him from afar off. So that's the hint he's giving at this point, 1st century AD. You might say, not the first time the tribulation has been prophesied or the second coming of Christ prophesied, because it was prophesied in Daniel and other Old Testament books. But one of the times that this prophecy is clarified, he is saying, when the Messiah comes back, it will be so obvious his light will shine across the earth, which is not hard to believe if he's coming in the sky on a white horse, right? Like the sun, you can see it from far away. Well, so will Christ. So these guys that you hear about but you can't see from the sky, don't bother with them. They're not the Messiah. Verse 28, wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, shall the sun be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, the stars shall fall from heaven, powers of the heavens shall be shaken, and there shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn. They shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. And that's kind of where we're at. The rest is a parable. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So, again, doesn't talk about the horses. Doesn't talk about the saints following him, but he does refer to the angels that will gather together the elect. Why? I believe gathering together, you might say, for salvation, that God is going to come and rescue them. The second coming of Christ is not the rapture. It is not going to be a similar event where when Christ arrives, all the saved will meet him in the clouds. That's not what's going to happen. When I say we, I won't be here. So all those that are left that are saved during the tribulation, they're not going to enter into the clouds and meet Christ. They will be in physical form and remain in physical form, entering into the 1,000-year reign of Christ. So they will have to physically be gathered together to come and greet their Savior. And the angels are going to be the ones doing the gathering. The angels are going to go into the mountains, into the forests, into the caves, where they've been hiding for the last 3.5 years, and say, you saw that light in the sky? That was the Messiah. Follow me. I'll take you to him. And just as when we die, the angels usher us to heaven, so will the angels meet these physical beings, humans who are still in their flesh, and usher them to the Messiah. Why aren't we gathering the Christians together to come to Christ? It seems we might have a different task. Now, I'm not going to get in depth on this, but when we return with Christ on white horses, what is it Christ is going to be doing? Judging the unsaved. When I say judging, I don't mean a slap on the wrist. What is he going to do? He's going to kill them. They're going to die. The only ones who will remain alive, physically alive, after Christ's second coming are those who got saved during the tribulation. I've already told you that those who take the mark of the beast cannot and will not get saved. Just because you didn't take the mark of the beast doesn't mean you will be saved, but you'll have a chance to be saved. You have the opportunity to be saved. Those will be gathered to Christ. All the unsaved will be killed. We're told that the body count will be so high that the blood will be as high as the bridle, the neck of the horse. We're told that for months, birds and vultures, carrion, will come down and eat the flesh of the dead. We're told that as birds are eating the flesh, the saved who just came out of the tribulation period, they've got a job to do for the next few months, and that is to bury all the bodies that have been gnawed on and rotting by the birds. Not a great way to start the paradise that Christ promises. It's going to be a very hard path for them for the first few months. But once that is complete, once the bodies have been buried, all that remains are the saints who've been glorified with God. That's us in our perfected form, and those who accepted Christ on this earth. And once all those bodies have been buried, God is going to then enact his perfect world order, you might say, uniting the world under his authority. And for the next 1,000 years, we will experience a paradise. We who have been raptured or dead will have already experienced that in heaven. We'll get to experience what it looks like on earth. But going back to what are we going to do? If Christ is essentially judging the world by the death penalty, and we are with him, I've wondered, what does that mean we're doing? One of two things. I can only come to a conclusion of one of two things. We are at his side to cheer him on, watching and you might say in his corner as he judges the world, or we are taking part in it. I'm not sure which one I believe is the case. I could see both being, well, Pastor Russ, would we in our perfected form, kill someone? Well, if Christ is killing people, always perfect, and gives us the authority to do so, if David, a man after God's own heart, was called upon to kill the wicked, Goliath and others, it's not a sin to do so. I think it's a little odd. It's odd for me to consider what that would look like, us in our perfected forms on white horses taking part in the judgment of the world by the death penalty. It does seem odd to me, but it is believable. But if we're not taking part in the battle, then we are spectators, because we're not gathering the people together. The angels are doing that. So on our white horses, we are within viewing range, watching Christ as he does what he has stated he will do. And the angels are sent out to gather everyone in. I think the real question is, what are we doing for the 1,000 years? Not so much what are we doing for that period of time, however long it is, of Christ judging the world. By the way, I don't believe it's in a moment. I don't believe that Christ is going to kill all the unsaved in one single moment. He is going to do that later. At the end of the 1,000 years, Satan is loosed from the bottomless pit, gathers all the unsaved, marches on Jerusalem, and at that point there is no battle. There is no white horses. There is no spectating. There is a brief moment where Christ, with his voice, calls fire from heaven, and all the unsaved are charred at that moment immediately. But what are we doing during the 1,000 years? I personally believe that is when the, you might say, the reward system that God had talked about, that Christ had described. The man who did well is receiving double the talents. He had 2, he did something with them in this life. God says, give him 4 in my kingdom. I don't believe that the rewards that we receive for what we've done in this life is eternal. I don't believe like you're going to have, double the talents of someone for eternity. I could be wrong. That's not how I see it. I believe that God's reward system culminates in that 1,000 years. All the promises he gave the Jews, that definitely takes place during the 1,000 years. But I also believe the promises he gave to the church, our promise to reign under him, to reign under his authority, that's during the 1,000 years. I don't believe that we are going to reign over other Christians under Christ for eternity. Like if you were established as a supervisory position upon the rapture or death, that for eternity you will always hold that spot. I don't believe that. I believe it will be relegated to those 1,000 years. So we in our perfected state will be given kingdoms, towns, villages, communities, jobs, whatever that might look like during the 1,000-year reign of Christ in our perfected form as a reward for the work that we did in this life. What does eternity look like? We have very little information about that other than it's going to be glorious. No death, no crying, no sickness, no pain. We have bodies, perfect bodies. What those look like, it's hard to claim. I wasn't there to see what Christ's perfected body looks like, but I've always assumed that our perfected bodies will be similar in nature to Christ. Not that we will be God, but that Christ, when he came down to earth, people could recognize him. They didn't seem to recognize him immediately, but upon further attentive view, they could recognize him. He was recognizable. And Christ could also eat. He could be held and hug others in return. He could walk, but he could also travel very fast. Now, it's hard to separate the abilities and things that God has because he's God and what we'll be given because we're not God. But we do also see angels traveling at amazing speeds and without the need of time and space. So I've always considered that in our perfected bodies, we'll be able to fly. Doesn't mean we'll have wings, but we'll be able to in some way travel quickly, if not travel through walls, but we'll also be able to eat and be able to enjoy the company and the embrace of one another because Christ did in his perfected body. And the Bible says he is the first fruits of the church, meaning he was the first one to experience this, which implies we will experience something similar, if not exactly the same to what he experienced. And he got to eat, and he got to embrace, and he got to be recognized. And I do believe in heaven you will recognize one another. I believe you will enjoy food. The Bible says there will be a banquet. I believe you will enjoy many things that this body currently enjoys, but there are some things we will not enjoy in heaven, one of them being intimacy. There is no marriage. There is no children in heaven. So intimacy will be eliminated from that factor of what the body will enjoy, but there's plenty of other things we will. All right, so that is the abomination of desolation, the warning for the Jews of what will happen when that takes place, and it is a warning to the Jews, and it is a future warning of a time in the tribulation. It is not a warning to the church, and it is not for now. So when people say, well, that person claims to be the Messiah, and watch out for them, and watch out for them, oh, obviously that's true, the Messiah is not here, but this verse isn't within the context of the church age. It is in the context of the tribulation period. All right, let's move on. Verse 32, now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender, putteth forth leaves, ye know the summer is nigh, so likewise ye. When ye shall see these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all things be fulfilled. Now that is a very hard verse to understand. I've read commentaries of theologians who struggle to explain that verse. How could it be that the generation that Christ is currently in would see all these things fulfilled when they've been dead for 2,000 years? Are they going to come back? Are they going to see it from heaven? Is that fulfillment of the prophecy? They'll see it from heaven? It's interesting how some of the verses that don't make sense because we are viewing them 2D rather than 3D. They don't make sense because we're viewing them purely through rote memorization of verses we know rather than critical thinking of putting together the context that we're looking at. Could it be, and I'm convinced that it is, that when he says, this generation shall not pass, could it be he's referring to this generation that is alive during the abomination of desolation? That if I did not come soon, you'd all be dead. Meaning, once this begins, because that's the whole context of this text, the abomination of desolation, that once the abomination of desolation begins, this generation will see all of these things come to pass. He's not saying everyone will live to see it. We know that's not true. He's saying it will not be 3 generations later that see the end. That once you enter into the abomination of desolation, my return will be so soon, it will be within 1 generation. That is what I believe this verse is saying. I don't see how it could say anything else. It obviously can't be true that the generation that Christ dwelt in would see the fulfillment. I'm not even convinced that our generation will see the fulfillment. I'm not saying it's not possible. I personally believe the rapture will be my lifetime. I've said this many times. But so did the Apostle Paul. So I'm in good company. He was wrong, and I might be wrong too. Obviously, I'm closer to it than he was, but I can't promise you it'll be in my lifetime. But I can promise you that this verse is the truth. Which means I don't believe this verse is referring to our generation either. He's referring to the generation that will be alive during the abomination of desolation. They will see all these things fulfilled. But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and knew not until the flood came, and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Then shall 2 be in the field, the one taken, the other left. Let's hold on before I get to this last part. This verse, these verses, talking about there will be things leading up to the final event. What is the final event we're talking about? Not the tribulation, not the rapture, the second coming of Christ. Armageddon, the second coming of Christ. That is the event we're talking about leading up to, the second coming of Christ. We as a church want to interpret all Scripture through the lens of the church. It's a dangerous thing to do. We want to interpret the Old Testament through the lens of the church, and all the promises to the Israel are to us. You buy a little promise book from Proverbs promise book or whatever, Psalms promise book, and you buy it on Amazon and you read a promise a day. Many of those promises aren't for you, but we as a church have owned them unrighteously without justification. Why? Because we're the church. Everything in the Bible is for us. No, you can benefit from everything in the Bible. We can learn deeper God's character. We can see God clearly on how he dealt with the Jews, but that does not mean that everything God said to the Jews is for the church. This entire chapter is not for the church and is not to the church. It is to the nation of Israel. And when he says that you will start to see things that will lead up to the end, he's not talking to the church. He's talking to the Jews. And those things leading up to the end are not the things leading up to the rapture. They are the things that happen after the rapture that lead up to the second coming. So again, when men get up and say, I am a prophecy speaker, and I'm going to give you all the details about prophecy, and they take you to verses like this and say, see, it's going to get really bad, like the days of Noah. And we're in the days of Noah, really bad. Well, right away, you know what? I want my money back. I don't need to hear anything else you're saying because you don't understand prophecy, because this prophecy is not to the church, it's to the Jews. And it's not for us now. It's for the Jews during the tribulation period. So if you got that wrong, I'm going to assume you know nothing else about Revelation or the Old Testament prophets, because you're going to filter everything through the lens of the church, and then you're most definitely going to be wrong on a lot of things. Jesus is saying there's going to be enough happening during the tribulation period where it'll be obvious I'm coming back soon. During the tribulation period. But we as the church, every generation, want to point to the wars that are around us and the famines and say, he's coming soon. Look at the wars, he said. There's been wars since the beginning of mankind. People have been starving. I'm not joking about that, but that's been a reality for thousands of years. We can't point to famines and to wars and say Christ is coming soon. That's always been the case. And the famines and wars that we know are nothing compared to what they will experience during the tribulation. That's when the real chaos happens. And that's when those who are still alive, that have access to the Bible, will be able to say, it's like the days of Noah here. Okay, now we're talking. Yes. And he's coming soon. And when it says we don't know the day of the hour, verse 36, no man knows that hour or day. Is that referring to the rapture? Think again, outside the lens of the church. What is it referring to? Second coming. The second coming. Well, wait a second. I mean, once the tribulation begins, don't we know 7 years from that period he's coming back? Not necessarily to the day, definitely not to the hour. He says, no man knows the day or the hour. You notice he does not say, no man knows the year. Because once the tribulation begins, you'll at least be able to know the year. You'll be able to know 7 years from this point, whenever that began. 7 years. But you won't know which day or hour in the 7th year. You have a general idea for a few reasons. First of all, if you know your prophecy, you know 7 years from the time of the rapture. Second of all, you will know that all these wars and all these famines and all this chaos, the times of Noah, is leading up to the second return very soon. But you won't know the exact time. And then, let's again think outside the view of the church, because this chapter is not for the church. It is for the Jews in reference to the second coming of Christ. Then shall two be in the field, the one taken and the other left. What is that referring to? What have you been told it's referring to? You've been told it's the rapture. You've been told wrong. Because again, this is not talking about the rapture. It's talking about the second coming. What is Christ going to do in the second coming? Judge the world. What will that judgment look like? Death. The ones taken here are not taken to paradise. They're not raptured to heaven. 2 in the field and 1 taken. That one taken is taken to be killed. 2 women shall be grinding at the mill. 1 shall be taken. Where is that one taken? To death. Watch ye therefore, for ye know not what hour your Lord doth come. But know this, that if the goodman of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. Therefore be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not the Son of Man cometh. Who then is faithful and wise servant, whom his Lord hath made ruler over his household, to give them meat in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. This is, again, not talking about blessings for the church who are looking for the rapture. I'm not telling you that, again, that's not a truth. If it is a truth, it's a truth outside of this text. This text is offering a blessing to those during the tribulation looking for the second coming, expecting the second coming, refusing the mark of the beast, enduring tribulation, living in the mountains rather than whatever comfort the cities can provide. By the way, I don't know how comfortable they will be by the 5th or 6th year of the tribulation, but whatever comfort they do provide, rejecting that, knowing Christ is coming back, they will receive a blessing if they hold on to that truth during what will be the worst 3.5 years that the nation of Israel has ever known in its entire history. Hold on to that truth. Christ is coming back. Don't be shocked when he does. Look for it. Blessed is the servant whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. Verse 48, but if that evil servant shall say in his heart, my Lord delayeth his coming, and shall begin to smite his fellow servants to eat and drink with the drunken, the Lord of that servant shall come in a day when he looketh not for him, in an hour he is not aware, and shall cut him asunder, and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. If you reject Christ during the tribulation period and choose to not look for a second coming because you don't believe he's coming, because you don't believe he exists, then you will die and go to hell. Now, I told you, according to Old Testament prophecies, which I will show you in that study of Revelation when we have it, that any Jew who makes it to the end will be saved. They will all be saved, which means for the Jews, if they're not looking for a second coming, then they'll be annihilated before his second coming, because at his second coming, he's not killing any Jews. For the Gentiles, of course, who are unsaved, they are fully capable of being killed and judged for their rejection of Christ at this time. And that is Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 25 actually continues on with this same thought regarding some parables about the 10 virgins and the talents of the last judgment in chapter 25 of Matthew. But due to sake of time, we're not going to continue that conversation tonight. We can do so at another time. We will end the video now. Joel, did he show you how to turn that off? Or Carrie, thank you. We're going to end the video now. For those watching online, we hope that you can join us again. Not next week. Again, I'll be gone next week. I'll be out of the country in Honduras, so no Bible study next week. And we'll pick up in Matthew 25 the following week regarding this